esta pena ya déjalo ya.
I can still remember the sound of the security gate clanging shut the first time I walked into a youth prison. I had just been asked to step in as Director of Juvenile Corrections, and I thought I should tour the state's facility. I have never forgotten what I saw that day. In fact, what I saw and heard that day in many ways leads me to talk to you about what some might consider a radical idea. I believe it is time to close every youth prison in America permanently, every single one of them, and replace them with things that work. Now, I want to tell you how I came to this belief, but I want to explain that I want to call these institutions exactly what they are. These are prisons for kids. They're often called youth development centers or youth rehabilitative centers or training schools or reformatories. But let's call them what they are. These are prisons for kids. Let me tell you a little bit about what I saw that day as I walked through the facility. I saw bright lights everywhere that I went. I saw 100 young people in a facility that had been built for 40. I saw young people wearing sweats with holes in them. I saw young people in handcuffs and shackles. I saw rows of isolation cells, and in each of those cells, I saw a young face staring out because that young person had been held in solitary confinement, sometimes for weeks. The walls of this place virtually dripped with a pervasive sense of dread and anxiety and tension and anger. And everywhere I walked in this facility, there was a sense of imminent violence. Well, I had a terrible night that night. I found myself thinking again and again, what would happen if one of my own children were being held in that place? And I thought, we've got to fix this place. We've got to make it better. And so I worked awfully hard for years. We changed leadership. We brought in new staff training. We brought in new programs. And I went all over the state talking to people about how we had to reform this institution. And I got a very interesting kind of pushback. People began to say to me, you know, Patrick, these are dangerous kids. These are predators. Nothing works with these kids. If we don't lock them up, they're going to destroy our communities. And I realized that we think about these young people and we talk about these young people in very different ways than we think and talk about our own children. We no longer see them as young people who need help to get back on track. Now, I should point out that most of the young people in this institution were black and brown. And for centuries, we have told ourselves very scary stories, and we've created ugly and threatening images about black and brown young people. These images, these stories we tell ourselves, were defeating my ability to change this place. In fact, this place was a monument to the power of those ideas. Everything about this institution said it was about punishment and intimidation rather than an opportunity to turn a life around. The building itself was large, ugly, loud. The cells throughout, lock cells where we would put young people at night, sometimes double and triple bunked like cages. The staff and the kids caught in their role of guard and prisoner, locked in this ongoing struggle of power and resistance. Everything about the place was about aggression, about violence, about control, about submission, and about deviance.
You know, that was a few years back there when they first did this to my son in 2009, and the work we were doing with the Texas Families of Incarcerated Youth and what they're doing to the kids in the juvenile. We were just at the finance hearings back in December 7th, and they're calling for this inhumane process to end. But this is where, you know, the mental health crisis is being identified today, and the 78,000 suicides they're doing with the study on this opioid epidemic that I had brought you, what they try to do here with their task force. not acknowledging the judicial process and what we're working with on a group there in Washington prior to what we did with Senator Booker when we did the Texas version of the Mercy Act. Now they have the Square One Justice Project. You can go online. I really need you to go online and call these people and get our case study of what we did here in San Antonio as far as, you know, our community's equities and our community safety, and how the municipalities are not acknowledging we as the citizens cry for humanity and the core values of our society not being acknowledged as to what's happening here. And we reached out to them to give them our case study, to give them our research, and and the work we're doing with the Family Forward Foundation. It's also online. And there was a young man that had really sort of touched me on what he was saying here with the Square One Justice Park. Let me let you listen to what he's got to say.
I'm now honored to introduce Arthur Reiser, the Director of Criminal Justice and Security Policy at the R Street Institute, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research organization dedicated to promoting free markets and limited effective government. Arthur is a participant in our executive session on the future of justice policy, and he's the author of the other premier primary justice, Square One Justice paper, which I hope you all have, a call for a revised set of values in criminal justice. Arthur's passionate and principled commitment to justice has contributed enormously to the growing involvement of the conservative and libertarian leaders in this field. And if you don't already follow Arthur on Twitter, I highly recommend it. You will enjoy it very much and learn a lot. Arthur?
Thank you. It's quite an honor to be here. My goal when I was asked to speak was to blow your minds. But in 3 minutes, that is incredibly difficult. So I recommend you read our papers, and it will blow your mind. The paper that I wrote is on values. And what I'm trying to do today, what I'm talking about today, is talk and give a primer to what that paper is about. Emily Mooney actually sitting over there, she helped me write it, and so she brings in the millennial perspective to that as well. We lack a modern set of values in our criminal justice world. And I use the word modern on purpose. And what I mean by that is that we have created a system where our values revolve around our institutions that were created 40, 50, 60 years ago. And that is really perverse, because the way it should work is our institutions should revolve around our values. Why do we need to fill prison cells that are empty? But because the institution has this as a goal, we promote it, whether we do it consciously or subconsciously. We need and are in desperate need for a revised set of values. A set of values based on the principles of limited government. I find it, quite frankly, insane that my brothers and sisters on the center right use limited government as a war cry, but when it comes to handcuffs and jail cells, they're conveniently quiet and silent. We need to stop being distracted by the shiny badges and understand that as Americans, there's nothing more American than expecting greatness from police officers, expecting greatness from our criminal justice systems. We need values based on parsimony. And what I mean by that is that a system cannot be harsher than what is required for its set of goals. Think about that. Why does not everybody shout that from rooftops? A system should not be harsher than accomplishing its goal. I find it incredible that we accept a vindictive government and then are confused by the idea that we don't have a limited government. Because by definition, a vindictive government cannot be a limited government. It is a capricious government. It is an arbitrary government. And as libertarians and conservatives, and I see you out there, by the way, I'm seeing the diverted eyes right now because they don't want to be called out like I was called out out of the closet by Catherine. But we should be leading the way on this. That is our core principle. A core principle of conservatism, libertarianism, is the suspicion of government. And you should be suspicious when it comes to handcuffs. You shouldn't be distracted by shiny things as certain individuals in the conservative movement right now. And most importantly, we need values based on the principle of liberty. This has to be the common thread that we all share. This is who we are as a people. And I know this sounds cheesy, but how can we cry about the dying of the American dream when we have disinherited a generation of people from that dream? But the good news is we're moving forward. I mean, if you actually saw the graph that Professor Western put up, we are starting to go downhill. And this is from the hard work of organizations and foundations like the Arno Foundation, the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge. The Charles Koch Institute has been instrumental to rallying the right around some of these issues. And this Square One project, we are doing good work to move the needle, to help create a better and more just nation. And this issue transcends the left or right. I'm always the token conservative because I'm one of the non-crazy conservatives that Jeremy and Bruce know. But this is an issue about human dignity. I mean, I think Jeremy said it perfectly. This is about human dignity. This is about right and wrong. And we should be led by good ideas and not by vindictiveness or hate. And I truly believe that is what we have done in our criminal justice system. I don't think it's done on purpose. I don't think there's anybody sitting in dark rooms going, wah. But that is what we have created. We have created a world where our values circle our institutions, and that is perverse, and we should be crying and changing it. And I am so proud to be here and taking part of that. Thank you so much.
And that being what we sent to Mrs. Huffman, she's the director when you go online, and please go online, the Square One Justice Project. This is crucial that we make sure we have our case study and our chronology and have the collaboration has to come together today. The president's calling for this mental health crisis to be brought to the forefront to where we can work on getting these members back in our society. And those being the members that this young lady had talked about. Let you hear what Ms. Dixon had to say.
Now I'm very pleased to introduce Vivian Nixon. Vivian is also a participant in the executive session. She's the executive director of College and Community Fellowship, which is an organization that I'm sure many of you know, committed to removing barriers to higher education for women with criminal record histories. Her list of accomplishments and responsibilities would take us the rest of the day if I were going to list them here, ranging from boards of directors to fellowships to the ministry. But for those of us who have the pleasure of knowing and working with her, we rely constantly on her unswerving conviction and her insistence on accountability and partnership. So I'm really, really grateful and proud to introduce Vivian Nixon.
Thank you so much, Catherine. I must take a few seconds just to thank Jeremy Travis and Bruce Western, who I have admired for many, many years, for inviting me to be part of the executive session. I was moved and honored to be asked and happy to contribute what little I can. My task here today was to talk about how we got here and where we should go. And my first thought upon hearing the challenge was, well, if I could do that, I'd be the candidate for a Nobel Peace Prize. But I will do the best I can to share with you some of my thoughts and ideas. And I'm not shy about saying that my perspective is unique in that it sits at the intersection of race and poverty and criminal justice, having been incarcerated myself, and gender, and the structural problems with many of our institutions, including institutions of higher education. So it's kind of a very unique perspective. So my remarks start this way. I don't think we can point to one event or even a series of events that got us where we are today with regard to how we handle justice and public safety in our society. What we do know is that we incarcerate our citizens and other residents of this country in multiple forms of incarceration and detention at greater proportions than any other nation. In my view, this is less about a series of specific events than it is about enduring, persistent, fundamental ideas rooted in patriarchy and white supremacist ideology. Those things rear their ugly heads and influence events and the public discourse around these issues. We know that we willingly practice punishment as a response to behaviors that are linked to social issues, such as poverty, mental illness, addiction, and structural inequity, rather than investing in real solutions. The reasons for the current state of American justice are complex. They can be traced back to the slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow segregation, and urbanization stories of our country. These are means by which America has attempted to maintain control over bodies that were valued once as cheap labor, and then found to be in excess when the nature of our economy shifted from industrial production to information and technology. Laws and excessive punishments served to disparately criminalize an entire population of people who were deemed disposable in the capitalist scheme and who now see the law as a threat to their lives rather than a source of protection. The wars on drugs, crime, and the poor have perpetuated two enduring ideas. One, that the unacceptable behavior of individuals is the cause of crime and poverty, and two, that the path to public safety is one of individual responsibility and accountability. There has been little tolerance for examination of the intersections between crime, poverty, and systemic and structural flaws built into the very foundation of American history. The rate at which people were incarcerated from 1970 until the early 2000s was allowed to accelerate so rapidly because the impact was largely on Black and brown communities. We have now reached the point where this trajectory has become morally reprehensible to some and economically unsustainable to others. The debate about various methods of reform threaten a compromise that simply maintains the status quo. These conversations are not new. They have been happening since the 1990s. One of the first things that I read that framed my thinking was a book written in 1999 by Mark Maurer, who I did not know was going to be in the room, Race to Incarcerate. Fast forward 10 years later, 11 years later actually, in 2010, Michelle Alexander writes The New Jim Crow, and somehow popularized this notion with her eloquent description of how mass incarceration is an extension of structural and systemic racism in America. Now, everybody is woke. And yet, there are multiple depths of wokeness which are determined by one's understanding of the integrated nature of these problems. Some want a system that is just, fair, equitable, and humane. Others want to use technology to expand surveillance and control of particular populations, thus reducing the cost of overcriminalization, but not the footprint. Square One recognizes that reforming something that is as broken as our criminal punishment system is may be futile. Perhaps it is not reform that is needed. A complete dismantling of our criminal punishment system and the creation of a system of justice that is not rooted in punishment, but in healthy, strong communities is what we must demand. It is not clear how we get there, so no Nobel Peace Prize for me. That is the reason for these conversations. That is the hope of the Square One project. It will take multiple stakeholders and approaches. There must be diversity of thought and background. Most of all, there must be a grassroots movement of people who envision a more equitable America, and that push must be led by those who have been most harmed by current and past injustices. This will require an investment in leadership at every level. We won't get there unless there is a balance between a focus on concrete solutions and a more ideological conversation about the values that underlie these solutions. I say we must put values first. I, together with all of you, look forward to the honest and robust conversations that will seed and plant a generation of ideas to create an America that works for all of us.
And there being what natives have for 500 years, over 500 years, have had to live with, and why we're not being even heard here in San Antonio. And you know, you followed me when I ran for senator, prior to when we went to the city, as far as the mismanagement being done and our trying to address whether this is the city we deserve, as far as what he said. And when you start having this inveigling going on and not acknowledging as far as what we brought you and what you're supposed to be being acknowledging, and what the tribes have taken to the city and looked at them to look at what our case study is, what we're working on, and what we're hoping for as far as what we gave Mayor, I hate saying Poison Ivy, but she was poison to our city. And what's being lost here, I mean, our city is one of the most historical cities, or was one of the most historical cities that was preserved. Now we got like a spaceship. The frost, when you're coming down 35 and you look at the city, then it's nostalgia, you know, as far as the buildings that are here. And the Frost Bank looks like a spaceship. I mean, it should have been over the north side somewhere, not downtown, not our historic downtown. But then to see how, and what I've advocated and brought you the work that we're doing here, and to be acknowledged as citizens, as far as I don't know if this thing's going to pass tomorrow, as far as A, B, and C, but we're going to have to really, really come forward on what is happening in our city. And to start inciting violence doesn't seem fair. And statistically, when Parmelo was the sheriff, I mean, I think I showed you on the last show everything that's going on over there. Now they're going to have a mass shooting seminar. They want to talk about this, but then they don't want to talk about what Sheriff James Dorsey talked about as far as our city's community safety and what he had brought to the Commissioner's Court on creating the stabilization centers over the mental health crisis. But we all know, and we've listened to where this came from and why we're having to deal with this being what today is. I mean, we became the most violent city in America in 2016 because we had a homicide increase from 90 to 160 that nobody wanted to put their finger on. But it's easy enough to look at the homicides we're having, some of the reports I gave you on how we managed to let this happen. But we're concerned as far as natives, and that's where we're hoping you'll join us in our campaign to be acknowledged as the principles here. We're human beings here, you know, but you're treating us like animals. You know, we asked to meet with this city as to our ancestors buried there at Mission San Antonio de Valero. It was the greatest thing in the world. Let you watch this.
So yeah, we've been getting a ton of feedback from a lot of community members through emails, through calls, letters that have come through to our city council office. And what we've realized, and what I've had to tell many folks who have called our office, is that, you know, this is a process that takes a lot of listening. And what we need to be very good at is not just listening, but getting that feedback and turning it into something that we do something with. You know, frankly, I've told many people that when you put a master plan out and it has a design, what you're going to get is praise, criticism, and a ton of feedback, but you need to be responsive in some way. And the problem is, oftentimes when you have too many cooks in the kitchen, that can lead to problems as well. But the bottom line is that we are only invited to the kitchen, and I say we, 10 council members and mayor, because the state at the end of the day needs something that we have, which is control of that Alamo Plaza area. And what I want to make sure is that we're not relinquishing too much of a final say, because we are the cooks that are in this kitchen that ultimately are the only ones that exclusively are responsible and attentive to exclusively the public. And because of that, I think we need to have some sense of a final say on the design. So I want to rewind. I don't think I heard very clearly what the city manager discussed was a decision that happened in 2015 about the final design.
And your question, Councilman?
So the Councilwoman Gonzalez asked a question about when did we as the city council relinquish control of the final design? And
Well,
you mentioned something that happened in 2015.
Yes. Well, first, let me back up and say that the guiding principles that were developed by the Citizen Advisory Committee, appointed by the mayor and council, develop guiding principles to advance the process. This is not just about a master plan today, but the evolution of that over the past 3 years. And so the council adopted those guiding principles in 2014, in late 2014, to allow us to go forward another step and to use that to develop a master plan. In 2015, with the new land commissioner, we entered into this tri-party agreement. So yes, we, I wouldn't say they, the General Land Office, we as a team are working together on creating this new experience, a respectful one for the Alamo. And yes, we're talking about vacating the street for cars and to allow pedestrians, but it's part of an effort. We don't have sole decision-making. We're doing this all together. And so the design per the 2015 agreement that the City Council approved does allow the master plan to come back to the council as concepts, but that the final design would be decided by the land commissioner and the mayor to move forward. However, I will say that there are other city council steps in this process. The vacation of the street has to go through a formal process through the Zoning and Planning Commission and then come back to the City Council for final approval. So there still are other approvals that the council will make, including the conveyance of the street to the state. And we have not worked out exactly how that conveyance will occur and how the ongoing operations and management of the plaza and the public space around the Alamo will function in the long term. So that we're working on. And I would just say about public space, you know, these chambers used to be wide open as well. But we now have guards, so to speak, at the entrances to allow ingress and egress. I don't think any of us like that. It is the day in which we live. And the same goes with City Hall. There didn't used to be metal detectors in the building, and people used to flow in and out. But there are rules and regulations in all kinds of public spaces to varying degrees. And we adjust those over time as is necessary. And I think what we're talking about is that as we develop the plans for the Alamo, we're talking about several $100 million of investment into this very important asset. And so we'll have to consider and further develop the plans as to how we protect the asset and protect the public's right to be a part of that. And that's what we will continue to work through over the upcoming months and years.
Thank you, Cheryl. I think the only thing I would say in response is that if we are going through an evolution of what time is asking of us, which is to adjust in ways that make things evolve with modernity, whether it's security and or the relevance of the space, that we are as respectful as we can through that process. And I think the respect needs to be heaviest on the feedback that we keep talking about we want to receive, which is that from the community. And I've gone on the record about a month ago talking about the glass walls. I said I was comfortable with the glass walls, but I also have to be cognizant of the fact that these decisions ultimately evolve with the community input. So that's not to say that I don't agree to some enclosure, but we are adding here our endorsement of one particular provision, which is the recapturing of the historic Mission Plaza. And said another way, I think that the ultimate recapturing of the historic Mission Plaza means that we do what we're going to say, which is, as a city council today, we're going to vote and endorse that concept. What I don't want that to mean is that there is license to recapture the historic Mission Plaza only in the way that 1/3 of the stakeholders agrees to. So the question is still the idea that we may be, in some sense, relinquishing what is the final concept on the recapturing portion to mean whatever the folks within the designing room will cook up versus what we will be able to say as a final statement as a council. Because let me repeat again, whether we want to say this or not, the design is not the city council's control. It is a tri-party decision, but I guarantee that we're going to receive 100% of the blame at the end of the day, and we'll receive 100% of the calls and the emails. And for that purpose, I want to understand that the vote that we're taking today allows us in the future, this is where I'm now going to ask us to think about the future, allows us in the future to disagree 100% with any design element. And in that disagreement, can the city council, and this is a conversation I hope to get some back and forth with the city manager, with Lori, can the city council say, you know, we don't want to convey the street. We're not satisfied. We're getting a blunt of community input and a blunt of community outrage about a specific portion. So we hold back on the conveyance. Is that a scenario that may exist in the future?
Mayor and council, yes, it could. However, I would just point out again that representing the city of San Antonio are Councilman Roberto Trevino and I, and we are coming to the city council regularly every couple of months with the updates on the plan to get direction from you as we represent the city on this tri-party agreement. And we will continue to take your comments and suggestions and requirements into consideration as we represent the city on that tri-party arrangement, which is the management committee.
So I think what you're saying is trust us. We're going to come up with a good design. It'll be good. You'll agree with it, and the entire council will support it. But if that is not the case, then you are assuming we will still have a chance to disagree with a final vote on a conveyance of the street. Is that true?
Yes, the council will have an opportunity to vote on the conveyance of the street. That is something that will have to come back to the city council.
And for her to want to say this is an asset, how do Native American burial grounds become an asset? So you need to call the mayor. Are you going to honor the burial grounds? The ordinance is 79745, October 20th, 1994. They made an agreement with our intertribal council, and we came back as the principals. They have our agreement. And we ask you to honor and respect our religious freedoms, to honor and respect the sanctity that was violated at the hospital there at Santa Rosa. But we have people that are decent enough to understand that this is protected and will be protected. This is not a cenotaph. This is not a plaza. It's Native American burial grounds. My ancestors are going to be protected if we have to call for a gathering of nations over this municipality's assets. Assets? What are you talking about? Keep your $450 million. You know what? Do what you did like you did in Phoenix when a young man killed himself because of your management. You've already destroyed one of the most valuable anthropological, archaeological sites of Native American history, what you did in your fraud, not just at the Tobin Center, also here at Hemisphere Park. You know what the bond said. So please, call the mayor.
Yo sé que un día volverás está peinado, ya déjalo ya. Yo sé que un día